The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, offering co-op advantage checking with cash back on all purchases, plus secure debit card controls, all from the UMass 5 mobile banking app. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop.
Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte.
Later in the show, we'll tell you how you can hear 13 millennia of local history this Sunday in Wendell as we chat with producer-archivist Michael Klein and Nolan Bika Project's David Brule about the audio documentary New Lights in the Dawnland.
But first, there's a bevy of activities headed to the area in honor of Martin Luther King Day, including right down the street with our friendly neighborhood orchestra.
Hi there, everybody. Hi there, everybody. Hi there, everybody. Hi there, everybody.
What?
Whoa, that was cool, whatever that was.
Why was that anything?
That was crazy.
I thought we were getting the remixed version of the Springfield Symphony Orchestra there for a second.
I'd take it.
The Springfield Symphony Orchestra will host its third annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Concert this Saturday, January 18th at Springfield Symphony Hall.
The concert is called New Musical World and will be led by renowned guest conductor Jerry Lynn Johnson, who in 2005 made history as the first black woman to win an international conducting prize and has continued to break barriers in Europe and the United States as the first woman or first African-American woman on the podium for many orchestras and opera companies.
Melissa White will be the featured violin soloist who's captured the attention of orchestras and audiences worldwide, many of whom already know her for her success as a founding member of the Grammy-winning Harlem Quartet.
Maestra Jerry Lynn Johnson, violinist Melissa White, and Heather Casey Roberts from the Springfield Symphony Orchestra, formerly of NEPM, our home company, join us now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with you, maybe, Heather. Talk about
Sure.
the importance of this third annual Martin Luther King Jr. concert for the Springfield Symphony Orchestra. Why is this something that has been important for the symphony over the last several years?
I think one of the biggest things that Paul and I and our entire team has tried to do since we've started to come out of that whole post-COVID era and bring new programming to the symphony is to really try to reflect what our community looks like and where we're living and bring all of the different communities together. And for us, that means showcasing all of these incredible talents that might not have always had an opportunity to come to play with our organization in the past. It's allowed us to create such strong connections with really beautiful community partners. St. John's, located in Springfield, working with Andrew Cade and the Springfield Cultural Council. And so it's been a really incredible way for us to celebrate where this music comes from, introduce people to music they may have never experienced before, and just showcase that the symphony is a safe space for everyone. And it's a way for the community to come together and shut off the loudness of the rest of the world right now.
Maestra Jerry Lynn Johnson, are you the one who has created the programming? What is going to be performed here at this MLK Day New Musical World concert at Springfield Symphony?
Well, I'd love to say it was all my idea, but it was really a collaborative effort between myself and Paul. And
Paul, who we keep referencing, is Paul Lambert, who is the president and CEO of Springfield Symphony Orchestra, who has joined us many times, but just not here today.
Yes, Paul is currently at home. He's recovering from a little surgery, but he's doing very well. He sends his love to everyone, and he would probably do this a million times better than me. So hopefully I can live up to some of his expectations.
But back to you, Maestra Jerry Lynn. You and Paul co-created this the program for Martin Luther King Day?
We did. I know that they were very interested in doing a number of pieces by African-American composers. And, I have to apologize. I'm in a hotel, and they have taken now to decide to vacuum the hallway outside of my door. So if hearing that noise, I apologize for that sound.
We're not hearing it, so it's good.
You're fine.
Oh, good. And so we sort of collaborated on what kind of program, and something very near and dear to my heart is making sure that when we include composers of color and women composers, that we don't just sort of lump them all together in a single program, but really show these artists kind of in dialogue with their colleagues of European and Latin descent, and just to show that there's a breadth of compositional voices operating across history, and to show the relationships between them. And so this concert is an example of that. The anchor piece on the program is the amazing Dvorak Symphony Number 9, titled From the New World, which I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with. And then on the program, we also have work by African.
There's so much chaos in this
That's
interview.
my dog. I am so sorry. Eddie is super excited about Dvorak's symphony.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
And
I was typing.
Yeah, so
I'm done.
Back to the Dvorak Symphony that the dogs love, everybody.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a great program, and I'm so delighted to be able to champion work by a really amazing composer, James Lee III, who wrote a piece called American, and it has references to the Dvorak Symphony Number 9 in it, but it really kind of takes a 21st century interpretation of Dvorak's exhortation for Americans in the 19th century to really look towards African American and Native American culture as a source of inspiration that's true to the soil of the country. He thought it was really a rich source of authentic cultural material for American composers to delve into. And so James Lee kind of really takes that to heart in his American. Of course, we have the amazing Melissa White for the Florence Price Violin Concerto Number 2. And yes, I did suggest her. It's always amazing to work with friends. I've worked with Melissa before. She's an amazing violinist and a beautiful soul and a wonderful performer. And so I'm just delighted that they accepted my suggestion, and we're excited to have Melissa join them as well.
Melissa, you're also very much into yoga, as we were discussing off the air, and I think that maybe the symphony may be incorporating some of this into the program, but that kind of highlights the spiritual aspects, I think, that Maestro Jerry Lynn Johnson was bringing up with you. You have an incredible list of folks that you have performed with, apart from just the world of so-called orchestral or classical music, including performing on Jordan Peele's thriller, Us, which is such a great movie, and performing alongside pop artists like Pharrell, Bruno Mars, Alicia Keys, the legendary Ms. Lauryn Hill. But what are you excited about bringing to the stage of the Springfield Symphony Orchestra with this particular concert coming up on Saturday, January 18th?
Well, first of all, I second Jerry Lynn's sentiments. It's absolutely a joy to get to work with friends. And so I'm really most excited to get to share the stage once again with her. And then I love getting to perform Florence Price's works. I think that her writing is very soulful. I think that her writing is a language that is specific in that she herself was an organist, a pianist, and she played for silent films. And so I think her work is really like a movie, and you hear themes returning, and I imagine it's a character who's back on screen, maybe in a different sequence or a different scene for the movie, but it's very just vivid. Her harmonies, I think, are so beautiful, and I love getting to sing them out. So I think that's what I'm most excited about. And then, as you mentioned, I do enjoy getting to take my music in lots of different places and play with lots of different people. So it's fulfilling that I get to have this classical outlet and this classical career, and then I also get to do some pop stuff, which is fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure people are super impressed with your virtuosity. I've seen you as part of Harlem Quartet a couple of times. I realized as we were going over materials for this. But doing concertos sometimes is a little bit different than small ensemble. Do you have as much opportunity in small ensemble to do the works of Black composers? Does that end up being one of your focuses?
Actually, yes. I mean, so being a founding member of the Harlem Quartet, I've been playing with them since we started in 2006. And actually, we've been pioneering works by underrepresented composers since 2006. So before it was like, quote unquote, the in thing and, the real world where everybody wanted to see the word, everyone wanted to see everywhere. So for us, it's always been our thing. We've been playing Wynton Marsalis's string quartet since our early days. We've been playing Duke Ellington's Take the A Train. A lot of jazz tunes we will rearrange for a classical string quartet and offer them on a classical concert, because we feel a lot like there have been lines drawn in genres of music that don't need to be there. because good music can be good music. And when people come out to a concert, they want to be moved, and they can be surprised. They can be, delightfully surprised by how a jazz tune by a string quartet can have a different sort of sound. And what is that called? Who knows? But it's nice to be able to have that area and outlet to be able to do these things. So yes, we've been pioneering pieces by Black composers, underrepresented composers, female composers for almost 20 years.
Jerry Lynn Johnson, Dvorak would seem on paper to be kind of an outlier in this concert, regardless of the fact that the Ninth Symphony is Symphony for the New World. But to me, I feel like Dvorak really fits because one of the things I remember about his music is the elevation of folk melodies into different contexts for people to hear them, not as like primitive, but in larger setting and richer fabric. Because I immediately see that with like Florence Price and William Grant Still and their work as well as many early 20th century Black composers. Can you talk about some of those connections beyond just the motifs that we'll hear in American?
Sure, sure. I mean, you're absolutely right. Dvorak comes out of an era in the 19th century where composers across Europe were really grappling with the notion of national identity and how do you express that in music. And so Dvorak was one of those composers who delved into his, Czech background and Slovakia, background to really find those folk themes and folk melodies that were authentic to his culture. So when he came to America, he brought that same sort of aesthetic here in looking into American culture. And one of the most influential people in that was an African-American, what we would now call musicologist by the name of Henry Thacker Burleigh, who is from Erie, Pennsylvania. And if you go there in Erie, they actually have a statue erected to Henry Thacker Burleigh. But he worked in insurance, but he was also, in his career, he was a musicologist. And he was very well known and collected a lot of Negro spirituals and those kinds of things, and introduced those to Dvorak while he was the director of the American Conservatory of Music in New York. And so that is how Dvorak came across a lot of this source material from African Americans in the 19th century. And so when you kind of fast forward to William Grant Still and Florence Price, who were contemporaries and part of the Harlem Renaissance, you have sort of the first African American, sort of the dean of African American composers of men, certainly William Grant Still, and then certainly, Florence Price. One of the leading African-American women, first woman to have an orchestra piece performed by an orchestra in America. You have them taking the advice to heart that Dvorak had offered, in the 19th century, saying, looking to their own material, looking to their own culture for a source of inspiration and authenticity, and sort of combining that with the European musical forms and compositional styles to create something quite unique and expressive. And it's something Aaron Copland did when you listen to his works, like Billy the Kid and Rodeo. It has that sort of Western, sort of American feeling. William Grant Still did the same thing. And what I love, and thank you, Melissa, for bringing this up with Florence Price's work in silent films, her work is very cinematic when you look at the way the themes are. And I think audiences, when they hear the William Grant Still, it's such a fun piece. And I just had to smile. I'm a big fan of Turner Classic Movies and like film from the 40s. And so when I hear this William Grant Still, I immediately am taken back to those old pathé news, like those newsreels that they would show in the movies. They would have that sort of music in the background, like boots are marching across Europe right now. And like, London rebuilds and like, all, that kind of news player voice. And then you have that kind of industrial music in the background. And this piece sounds exactly like that. I think with these composers coming up, all these American composers in the 20s, 30s, 40s, you have the influence of cinema and that new art form of moving pictures influencing compositional style as well. So I think there's a lot in this concert for people to enjoy and grab onto.
More about the Martin Luther King Jr. Celebrating Program New Musical World at Springfield Symphony Orchestra with other organizations, including the other organizations that Terry Lynn Johnson and Melissa White are a part of when they're not hanging out in Hampden County.
Followed by an indigenous retelling of the past 13,000 years of history in Western Mass in a 2-hour audio documentary centered in Northfield through the New Lights in the Dawnland audio documentary.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by UMass Amherst School of Public Policy, offering graduate programs in public affairs, public policy and administration, data analytics, and computational social science. umass.edu/SPP.
It's so exciting to hear you describe these pieces. Not everyone is a hardcore classical enthusiast, historian. They don't know all these things, and the way you're speaking about them makes it feel so relatable to so many people that might not have these connections. And I, for one, have been so excited for this program since we put it together, but I'm even more excited now hearing your enthusiasm and a little bit of the background and how you take on these pieces. I find it so interesting when our conductors get on stage to kind of see how they vibe with the orchestra and the energy that they put out. And I think this is just going to be such an incredible performance, but something also very different than what we've done in the past and a little bit outside of the box and very relatable for an audience that might not feel like they are welcome in this traditional symphonic experience.
That's Heather Cassie Roberts from the Springfield Symphony Orchestra, who is hosting this Saturday, January 18th, New Musical World, their annual Martin Luther King Day concert, and it will feature the maestra Jerry Lynn Johnson and violinist Melissa White. And if you're engaged by this conversation as somebody who wants to learn more about classical music or this type of music or some of the histories they've been talking about, there will be a conversation with Jerry Lynn Johnson and Melissa White that'll take place at 2 on January 18th. That's open to all of the ticket holders.
I have an absolutely frivolous question for Jerry Lynn Johnson. Which part of the staff is the hardest to follow as you go through scores?
None of them. I mean,
I say this because I have woodwind problems.
I see. So when I'm studying a score, I don't know what other conductors do, but I have really expensive and wonderful Yamaha Clavinova, like the high-end one. And so I can record multi-track. I can do multi-track recording of any instrument that I can pick on the thing. And so I literally lay out each single instrument in its own track, and I rebuild the score from scratch. And so by the time I get to, and I do this because I do so many world premieres, there's no recordings to listen to. There's nothing for me to go on except for some terrible MIDI, which is no help at all. And so in order for me to be the subject matter expert when I stand in front of the orchestra, what I have to be? I have to know every part of that score. And so the only way to do that is to literally just rebuild it from the ground up. Then it just becomes, I know the music and I know I can answer questions and I can be like, this note is probably wrong here, or this rhythm should be this, and those kinds of things. So you have to build it inside your head piece by piece, I think. But, to your point, I do hate transposition. I'm just going to say it. I hate transposition. It's the bane of my existence, especially as a pianist, where for us, notes are fixed physically in terms of where they are in the XYZ plane of three-dimensional reality. And so to think of middle C being somewhere else, it took me a minute to loosen that up in my head, where middle C is just an idea. It's not a button that I push. It's an idea. I have to say that realization that middle C as a concept was really a foundational insight for me, especially from a Buddhism standpoint, like the illusion of form. Like middle C is not a thing, it's an idea. Like the illusion of form is now. All these things are mere concepts. Don't fall for the illusion.
That's good advice for someone who's really bad at making horn charts, but really needs to start actually making horn charts for her band.
It's hard.
It's hard.
Jerry Lynn Johnson, I know that you are the founder and artistic director of the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra, which has done some incredible things, including going to participate at Davos, the World Economic Forum. Can you tell us about that organization and the mission that you've brought to the Black Pearl?
Sure. Black Pearl is the orchestra that I founded 18 years ago. But yeah, so I founded Black Pearl, and the idea was I believed an orchestra should reflect 20th century, well, at that time, 20th century, now 21st century American values, because I felt like, orchestras as cultural institutions were something that reflected kind of 18th and 19th century American ideals grafted on by their love and admiration for their European roots. And so I thought that in order for orchestras to survive and be relevant in 20th century culturally diverse America, we needed to begin to reflect that demographic reality in our country. And so our orchestra is the most diverse professional orchestra in America. African American, Latin, Asian, European, people from countries all over the world, different cultures. They all are from Curtis, from Juilliard, from Peabody, from, the Sorbonne, just the world class, Royal Academy of Music and, El Sistema and, Venezuela, like the best musical programs around the world. And these are our musicians. They perform as soloists around the world. They sub in with the Philadelphia Orchestra, the New York Philharmonic, all these kinds of things. And so we're really blessed to have created this musical family of excellence. And we're all really committed to this idea of living our values as musicians within this organization. We also make great music. That's what every orchestra aims to do. And so the idea was really to make a political statement without saying a word. And that was that cultural diversity and excellence are not mutually exclusive, that you can do both and all at the same time. And that was really important for us to demonstrate that on the stage. What we found is that often underrepresented people or people who don't have access to opportunities or information, it takes them longer to sort of gain the sorts of experiences and opportunities that maybe younger colleagues who have more privilege are able to achieve. And so a lot of times they'll age out of opportunities before they even know that those opportunities are there to be had. And so by kind of eliminating a lot of age restrictions on things, you can kind of find a wider group of people to give these opportunities to who are incredibly deserving and very talented, but maybe just didn't know kind of what was out there to sort of help them along.
Both the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra and the Harlem Quintet have educational components as part of their general operational structure. How difficult was it to incorporate an educational unit in your performing schedule? I think we've already talked about the importance of it. So how hard is it to manage doing the educational aspect alongside a robust performance schedule?
So for us, it's really been the fabric of who we are. And so it's not hard because it's not an additional thing. It's who we are and it's what we do. So it's a part of everything that we do. When we go to perform a standard concert on any series, we additionally either do a community concert if that's what's best for the town or community we're in, or we're going into schools to work with their young people if that's maybe what's best for the community or the town that we're in. It really goes side by side with what we do, and so therefore it doesn't feel like an add-on or an extra.
That was Melissa White. Jerry Lynn Johnson, how about the Black Pearl and your educational elements?
Black Pearl did educational elements in a unique way. We are blessed in Philadelphia to have a number of really great educational institutions that work directly with youth. And we didn't want to do the sort of traditional orchestra thing where we bring the orchestra into a school, do a petting zoo, and do an orchestra concert. And then the kids are like, great, we got out of math class. And then, that's it. You know what I'm saying? I don't know how impactful that is for the kids.
Right.
And so one of the things we decided to do was teach kids how to conduct, with the goal of not being that they learn to conduct an orchestra and become future conductors, although if that happens, that's great. The idea was really to give them a tool to help develop their ability to communicate more effectively. And so it was really a social emotional development sort of workshop that we developed, using conducting as a tool for teaching them all kinds of things about life, like what you put out in the universe is what you get back. And so how to really manage and communicate in really subtle but important ways in society.
The concert is happening this Saturday at Springfield Symphony Hall in Springfield. It's called New Musical World. It is Springfield Symphony Orchestra's third annual Martin Luther King Jr. concert in honor of the holiday and of the man himself. I don't want to harp too much on the pop side of what you've done, Melissa, but I do. Melissa White, who has worked with, as we mentioned before, Lauryn Hill and Alicia Keys and Bruno Mars and more. Can you give us either a glimpse into who in the pop vein you may be working with soon, and or who you would love to work with if given the opportunity that you haven't yet?
Oh my goodness. I will say the ones I've worked with have been so much fun. And when I got to play with Lauryn Hill, it felt like the best karaoke ever because I grew up with her album, right? So it was really in real time, I'm singing the songs I sing anyway, but with the actual artist. So that was a real dream. We did this really great concert. The first year, Juneteenth was celebrated as a national holiday at the Hollywood Bowl out in LA. And that still to this day is one of the most exciting concerts I've done, only because we haven't had our Springfield concert yet.
Yes,
so
right.
Everyone, that's going to be the most exciting. But we played with so many artists who, again, I grew up with. So Belle Biv DeVoe, Earth, Wind and Fire, the list goes on and on. But basically, who else would I want to be playing with? Probably some of the oldies but goodies. If Mariah Carey were ever to do something again with live strings, I'd love to be there.
Yeah.
Boys to Men. Oh my gosh, that would be fun. But
Well, if Jerry Lynn Johnson is in Philadelphia, maybe she can get you Boys to Men.
Okay, fantastic.
I have so many ideas, for like, I would say like Cleo Soul. I don't know if you know, but I mean,
I love Cleo Soul.
Right.
That would be awesome.
That could be
actually, you're right. And Snow Allegra.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about, right? I could see all of that.
Yeah, Bay.
I like where we're going.
The eruption of neo soul. Is that what we call it? Because it's kind of what it is.
Oh yes. See, that's our vibe for our yoga retreat.
I love it.
Yeah. Planning a yoga retreat, planning all these collaborations, all in the middle of the interview, all in anticipation of the new Musical World concert at Springfield Symphony Hall.
We're for it, especially because my next question is so heavy. I'm sure that both Melissa and Jerry Lynn have opinions on this, but I'm genuinely curious about your answers, especially in light of like a really important concert like this. But could either of you talk about aspects of representation versus tokenism, especially in classical music?
That is a very deep question. A good one. Jerry Lynn, do you have any thoughts right away?
Well, I mean, I think the difference being where the power lies and who has access to that power. And I think that's the difference between tokenism and representation. I think as long as you continue to keep people away from access to power, it remains tokenism. I think when you bring people and give them a seat at the table, give them the right to speak at the table, the right to set the table, the right to lay the table, the right to put the food out on the table and decide how giving them access to seats at the table, that becomes representation.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Melissa White? Do you have thoughts on that?
I really like that, and I agree wholeheartedly. I also think sustainability, letting the voice continue to be heard and not just be a one-time representation to check a box.
Yeah, that part.
But I also think it's important we're still having these conversations because a little bit there's been like a diminuendo, right? Back in 2020, this was all you were hearing. Every panel you were watching or tuning into had something about this or the topic would come up. And now it sort of feels like we've gone back into don't really talk about it, but make sure you're doing a thing. But are you doing too much? Don't do too much if it's not going to be the right thing. So in a way, it's, I think it is good that we're still having this conversation and we're still talking and thinking and doing something about it.
Well, especially because I think so many organizations are worried about the diversity, equity, and inclusion because there could be threat of punishment from the federal government who have said that they're going to crack down on things like this with giant organizations, with universities, and we're seeing that right now. So continuing these conversations above and beyond just Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, I think is very, very, very important. And what you're bringing to it musically will make a crescendo, no diminuendo, a crescendo to use more musical terminology and keep this conversation going, which will happen. You can be in conversation with these folks too at 2 p.m. on Saturday, the 18th. It is the new Musical World Martin Luther King Jr. 3rd Annual Springfield Symphony Concert happening at Springfield Symphony Hall this Saturday. And we have been joined by the maestra for the concert, Jerry Lynn Johnson, as well as the virtuosic violinist, Melissa White, and Heather Cassie Roberts from the Springfield Symphony Orchestra itself. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with all of you.
Thank you.
And now, like Presidential Medal of Freedom winner Michael J. Fox, we're going back in time.
But way further than he went for sure. Michael Klein and David Brule join us to speak about the audio documentary New Lights in the Dawnland, happening at the Wendell Meeting House this Sunday.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Ski Sundown in nearby New Hartford, Connecticut. Groom twice daily for optimal skiing conditions both day and night. Ticket information available at skisundown.com. Winter made better.
I always forget that it's called Nolambika. I still call it Friends of Wissatinawag by accident half the time.
Interestingly, historically, basically the Friends were founded to save the land. And then activists, as they are, once the site of Wissahickon was saved, they just went away. And the organization morphed into the Nolambika Project back around 2010. So the Friends of the Wissahickon have gone on to other struggles.
Yeah.
So
Well,
one of the
it's
things
been
that
15 years, so I should get over it.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. New Lights in the Dawnland is an audio documentary of the history of Northfield as told by Indigenous voices. And this Sunday, January 19th at 1:30 p.m., Michael Klein will present New Lights in the Dawnland at the Wendell Meeting House in Wendell.
The presentation is based on recordings of 5 Indigenous narrators recounting 13,000 years of Indigenous history in Northfield, leading up to the arrival of English colonists in the 17th century and the impacts of colonialism that followed their arrival. The narrators not only carry the stories and memories of their own culture, but also weave in knowledge from a decade of archaeological research on their homelands and battlefields, as well as information from old letters, diaries, and other written colonial records.
The recordings also feature songs, flute and drum interludes, and ambient sounds, creating vivid imagery to accompany the narrator's stories. The presentation will be followed by a discussion led by David Brule, president of the Nolambika Project, who's also one of the narrators in the production. And we are joined by David Brule, as well as the archivists behind this production, Michael and Carrie Klein, who were co-directors of Talking Across the Lines. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I know that I'm going to shout out David Brule's lovely wife who walks by my house all the time. It is her birthday, so happy birthday to Monique. And David is in Peskiumskid in Great Falls and Turner's Falls right now. And Michael and Carrie, where are you right now?
Oh, I'm sitting in my living room in Sunderland, kind of behind the shopping center. It's a great place to live because there are 2 bus lines that pass right near here. The bridge is right here, and you can just be anywhere in the valley in pretty record time.
Is that the shopping center with the really awesome Korean Bonchon place, or is that the other shopping center further up the road closer to 47? I should not tell people exactly where you live.
He already has.
Oh, we're always glad for company.
Michael, you are a storyteller and an archivist. You were part of the Pioneer Valley Folklore Society, which sounds fascinating, collecting stories in audio form, which is sort of what our mission is here in many ways, the Fabulous 413. How did you come across this project and the voices who have been recounting this 13,000 years of Indigenous history, specifically for the town that we now refer to as Northfield?
Well, Carrie and I moved here 4 years ago without a job because this house that we're living in suddenly came on the market, and it's 2 doors down the street from her sister, with whom she had never really enjoyed an extended adult relationship. So it made sense for us to make the jump. And from West Virginia, where we've been living for over 30 years, and then to move here where we had first met. But we arrived at a time of celebration for Northfield and Deerfield on their 350th birthdays. Both of these projects saw the need for doing some oral history work, a memory gathering project, which is how I would describe the work that we do. We are not investigative reporters. We're 180 degrees off of being investigative reporters. We encourage people to claim control of their own life stories and to tell them in their own way without a lot of getting peppered with a lot of questions. We just encourage people to talk about things. It's amazing what people will tell you when given space to do so. So the COVID was raging when we got here, and we kind of laid low. We did, I didn't get out and try to find old friends and stuff. We just sort of laid low here that winter, and then in the spring we went to a celebration, or a commemoration, I should say, hardly a celebration, but a commemoration of a massacre that occurred at Great Falls in 1676 at the height of the King Philip's War, which I had known nothing about. In fact, I wondered, how come I don't hear about King Philip in my meanderings through European history? I just had no consciousness of what the beginnings of the colonial period were like here. And this was a commemoration of something that I could barely imagine. And the first person I heard speaking was David Brule. And he didn't lecture, he didn't judge, he wasn't expressing anger or regret. He was simply turning history into the warmth and intimacy of a story. And I found it very compelling. So, in the course of doing a memory project for the 350th of Northfield, I recorded interviews with David and with other people that I had met early on. When I discovered the Battlefield Association managing a decade-long project funded by the National Park Service to explore further history of local battlefields. And I learned about a whole new branch of anthropology called called battlefield archaeology.
And I know, David Brule, you as the director of the Nolambika Project, the president of the Nolambika Project, after helping to preserve the land that is known as Wissatinawag in what is now known as Turner's Falls or Great Falls, or very near there, that has been dominating much of your time, this battlefield project, trying to recount what happened in the Turner's Falls massacre conducted at the hand of Captain William Turner, who the village is named after. What I have learned from you in the past that I think is fascinating is that his lieutenant in that same massacre, his last name was Holyoke, and that there's not as much of a movement to try to recount for Holyoke's role in that particular thing as much as there is in Turner's Falls. But this project that will be at the Wendell Meeting House this Sunday, New Light in the Dawnland, is particular to the histories of Northfield. Can you tell us a little bit about what story you'll be telling in this presentation this Sunday in Wendell, David?
Yeah, sure. Indeed, was centered on Northfield, and that was where the impetus for the presentation came. But on the other hand, given the speakers involved, such as Doug Harris, who is a specialist of ceremonial stone landscapes, and Rich Holshoe, who is speaking of the original Sokoke homelands, which encompassed Northfield, along with the singing of Roger Longtoe and the deep felt recounting of life in Northfield by Joe Gravelin, who is a resident. I think that the audio casts a wider net in a lot of ways because it does encompass a lot of story and histories of most of this part of the Connecticut River Valley. At a certain point, following my own meanderings and heart, I wind up talking a bit about the story of the Great Beaver at Weequaunts, the Sunderland landmark, Mount Sugarloaf, known now by most people in the valley. So what I'm saying is that the Northfield part of it is really the core. On the other hand, our talks do encompass some really deep history and deep knowledge of the entire region, going back, literally, as it was mentioned earlier, going back to the retreat of the glacier. It goes beyond Northfield, and it is a fascinating story recounted by Joe Gravelin and Rich Holshoe and Doug Harris, as well as myself and the singing of Roger Longtoe.
And the current myself is David Brule, who's the president of the Nolambika Project, and we're speaking with Michael Klein, who is one of the co-directors of Talking Across the Lines, who will be presenting New Lights in the Dawnland, an audio documentary of the history of Northfield and beyond, as told by Indigenous voices, this Sunday, January 19th, 1:30 at the Wendell Meeting House.
I have a question about production because I am so much a process girl. This is a 2-hour presentation. I'm curious how much raw footage you had, because clearly this isn't going to be everything, all the stories that you got. So how much footage did you whittle this down from? And is there enough there to make more sort of first-hand accounts of the history of this area from what is left?
Thank you for that question. The beauty of this sort of work, community-based oral history projects, or spoken history, we would like to call it. Oral history has sort of a dusty feel about it.
It sounds like my dental records.
Stop.
So people talking, people not answering questions, but people generating their own narrative out of their own memories. We believe that these people are authorities on their own experience. And we treat them as, hats off to you, authorities, which is that we sit quietly and wait for them to organize their own memories in their own way. These interviews averaged 90 minutes, and my recording session with Roger was 90 minutes long, and I think he recorded maybe 8 or 10 of his songs beautifully. We had to get the microphone practically into the next room. There's such tremendous delivery, and which he did not tone down for the change in spatial arrangement.
Some people only sing with power.
Yeah, you got to do it the way you got to do it.
But the beauty of these community-based projects is, and really the most important thing about them is just what you were asking about, which is you end up with a community memory archive, which in our case, we average about 90 minutes, although sometimes we go much longer and sometimes we come back for more interviews. I used 2 hours out of what's 5 times 90?
Yeah, that's like almost 8 hours
Time
of material.
math. It's tough.
Almost 8 hours of material.
And yet, I'm sure, covering 13,000 years of indigenous history is almost simply a drop in the bucket.
More on New Lights in the Dawnland with archivist producer Michael Klein and one of the narrators, David Brule, on the way as we examine the first steps of the project, perspectives of time, and more.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 885 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, offering solar options, energy security, and solutions for the local community. Learn more at northeast-solar.com. The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Window World of Western Mass, a local family-owned and operated complete exterior remodeling business offering windows, siding, gutters, and more. windowworldofwesternma.com.
It is an audio recording. And about a couple of years ago, when Michael had embarked on this project, I had him over to this house here. And we sat and talked for quite a while, and I included that in my column of the Montague Reporter. And I said, basically, Michael, what is the deep value of oral presentations without images? As you, Monty, includes the being radio people.
What is our value?
You don't see images. And I don't know the last time you both had a chance to think about this. Maybe you do it all the time, but without a prefabricated image in front of you while you're hearing someone talk, which could be a real distraction. According to Michael, people's minds create images and make it a very rich experience beyond the oral storytelling. It's very, very ancient, a way of telling a story without having an image flash on the screen in front of your eyes all the time. And so as you listen and get involved and enthralled and with the voice of the narrator, it gives you a whole other kind of experience. And that has been absolutely astounding for me. We've done these sessions in a number of places now, and people sit and listen and hear things and see things that we couldn't imagine, but they are following their own thoughts. And we're so bombarded with increasingly rapid flashings of images in front of us to step back and sit and listen quietly without interrupting the narrator, without even being able to. It's really pretty a wonderful experience.
It's interesting to me, Michael, who is one of the archivists and the co-directors of Talking Across the Lines and behind New Lights in the Dawnland, this audio documentary that will be presented on Sunday in Wendell, the inclusion of music in this, what seems to be a largely storytelling endeavor. Talk about that as an important piece of why you wanted to include the music in the storytelling.
Well, I try to choose music in my productions that underscores what's been said or puts what's been said in a whole, a whole nother dimension, the dimension of song and the dimension of emotion and expression. I don't just fling in a tune just to fling in a tune.
I think about it in terms of especially cultures with much longer histories, like Indigenous peoples and Aboriginal peoples. The way that song also works within those communities tends to be a lot different than the way that modern society thinks about music. You think about the fact that songs in Aboriginal culture are maps. They outline where you have to go, when you have to go, what you're looking for. And I think having that sort of a framework, even though it's not exactly the same, is really important. Music is important to the progress of Indigenous culture, I feel but also I'm not Indigenous. But I am curious about, David, in similar fashion, the way that Western civilization breaks up time is not necessarily the same way that this 13,000 years might have been compartmentalized for this particular piece. How is that large span of time broken up in smaller chunks for us to understand?
That's quite a topic. A typical way of phrasing indigenous histories is as opposed to, let's say, Western thought being sequential, linear. Native people tend to view their past and their histories in a cyclical way. So one of the things that comes out during the talk is the cycle of global climate change, interestingly enough. So a lot of our storytelling involves going back as far as the last glacier and in a way, what goes around comes around. Rich Holshoe is incredibly spiritual in his recounting of this way of remembering. The year is divided up into many moons, which are not the same way that Westerners divide up their year. And the moon refers to a certain type of thing that happens each year in nature. So it's just really a more complex way of looking at things. Luckily, people like Rich Holshoe have deeply researched, but also found people who are capable of transmitting that kind of information. But I guess it boils down to a kind of a linear year after year from what we used to call BC to AD, as opposed to a native way of looking at things, which is closely tied to the cycles of nature and birth, death, and renewal cycling each time, which is not far from what you were mentioning, other Aboriginal people, even including the Celts, right? There's a lot of ways of looking at things that people are beginning to once again realize that listening to indigenous knowledge and hearing indigenous people speak of their culture and the way of interacting and reciprocating with the forces of nature is very, very key to the whole outlook.
And you have an opportunity to do just that this Sunday, January 19th, 1:30 at the Wendell Meeting House in Wendell. It's an audio documentary called New Lights in the Dawnland, recounting 13,000 years of Indigenous history from our area, and is presented by 5 Indigenous narrators, including David Brule, who is the president of the Nolambika Project, who has been joining us, and archived by Michael and Carrie Klein, who are part of Talking Across the Lines. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us a glimpse into this presentation this weekend.
Well, it's great to have been able to share this. Thank you for this.
Oh, thank
Our
you.
pleasure.
It's interesting because we talked with David Brule there about an audio-only documentary, which, as somebody who listens to a lot of audiobooks and podcasts, that's what an audio documentary is.
It
But
is.
have you ever sat with a group of other people for 2 hours and listened to something together? I don't know if I ever have. That's not music.
Like, that's not music. Yeah, to like proof things, but not necessarily like coming together to listen, like specifically listen.
Yeah.
Where there wasn't somebody like on a stage. I still think it's a really interesting thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like it would be a fun experience to do that with a bunch of other people. Because I think the thing I love about radio and about podcasts is that it's such an intimate thing. You're usually like in your headphones or most of the time alone in your car.
Yeah. And imagining things on your own, there's a really wonderful element that like your brain kind of gets to take over some of it and just like he was saying, like picture it in your mind in the way that you see fit. In the same way that this is an interesting segue, but like there's a lot of times where with anime series, I Am a Giant Geek, like where the voices don't necessarily match up in the way that you think they should.
Absolutely.
And you're like, this takes me out of it immediately.
Yeah. Or, like I read a lot of books out loud to my 11-year-old. And if there's a movie associated with that particular IP, they're not allowed to watch any of the movies until all of the books have been read out loud, so that their impression in their mind of what the characters look like
I agree with
is in their own brain. I love that.
Yeah. I like that a lot.
And that's why you listen to horror instead of watch it.
It is, because like other people's idea of what horror is definitely not what my idea of horror is, and sometimes theirs is a little much for me. Apparently my brain keeps it PG for me.
I listen and watch a lot of horror.
I like the funny ones.
Yeah.
The funny ones are cool.
Anyway, this Monday is MLK Day, a holiday that is younger than either of us, and a huge annual celebration will return to the Mass Mutual Center in its honor, and tomorrow in the fabulous 413, we will preview that.
And we'll also hear how 80 lucky artists will be encouraged in their craft as we speak with Vanessa Ford about the Trust Transfer Project Artist Development Fellowship Cohort. And word nerd Emily Brewster is back from living all of our linguistic dreams at the American Dialect Society's Vote for Word of the Year. We'll hear all about the things they voted on. I'm Khalees Smith.
I'm Monty Belmonte.
We'll see you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413, where I'll speak better.